Okay, good morning, people. I'm Simon Trezellian, and welcome to Russia versus Ukraine, probably the untold story. This is the first time I've done one of these live aspects, so it's going to be interesting to see where we go with it. Okay, so from a background point of view, I'd spent 19 to 20 years in special forces and British intelligence, so I understand what really goes on in regards to how various different political things happen in the world. What I'm seeing with this whole Russia-Ukraine thing is very different to what people are actually being told in the news media. There are a lot of agendas at stake here, and really people need to know what is truly going on. So firstly, what I will say is that there will be no World War III in regards to this. It's just simply not going to happen. There's a number of reasons for that. There's a number of reasons why the Russians are doing what they're doing. But first of all, let's look at the history of Ukraine. Ukraine is a very, very important country in regards to Europe. It's right bang in the center. It used to be the major buffer zone between the Warsaw Pact and NATO. It's where nearly all the pipelines go through. It's where the biggest transitory elements go through from east to west. It's a really important, crucial part, and always has been. Now, the Ukrainians are an interesting people in that they are very much divided. They always have been. There are the ethnic Ukrainians, and then there are the Russian Ukrainians. And it's almost like never the twain shall meet. Obviously, that had a massive impact during the Warsaw Pact period. But also during the Second World War, the Ukrainians had their own SS division. So half of Ukraine was working with Hitler and with the Nazis. And after the Second World War, a lot of the Russian ethnics came back into the Ukraine and bolstered what was the Warsaw Pact. So now what you've got in Ukraine is you've got ethnic Ukrainians, more to the Western side, which align very much to Western values and more conservative. And then you have the Eastern side, which is largely ethno-Russian, and to the south as well. So that's what we're left with. So Ukraine, it's not like a sovereign country that's just being invaded by Russia. You've got half the Ukrainian people actually believe they are Russian and would actually embrace Russian occupation or closer ties with Russia. And you see that on the political spectrum, they go back and forth between the various different factions. Some are pro-Russian government, some are pro-Western government. Obviously, with the fall of the Warsaw Pact, Russia then saw, and as is now seeing, a lot of the former Warsaw Pact nations joining NATO, and therefore the buffer zone that they had, which was largely all of East Germany, Romania and Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, I mean all of those countries are now no longer a buffer between the West and Russia. So that gives Putin cause for concern. The other cause for concern, of course, is that they lost the Warsaw Pact, which therefore they lost a lot of geopolitical influence. So they're trying to get that back as well. So with the fall of the Soviet Empire, what actually happened then is that it put greater tensions. So we went from one Cold War to a new war, which is largely economic as opposed to military. So Ukraine is no stranger to having Russians on their border. This is nothing new. The Russians, quite regularly rattle their sabers, and the reason that Putin is doing this right now is really very clear to me. And it's certainly there's no way he wants a war with the West, and he certainly wouldn't trust a war against NATO. That would destroy everything he's been trying to build. You've got to remember that Putin is not like any other leader in the world. So he is not a career politician, just like Biden. Putin is a former KGB head. He is an intelligence operator. He understands what actually goes on in this world, and therefore he's pretty dangerous, but he's a very effective leader. He understands what's going on at home as well. They've had COVID the same way as everyone else has. He's under massive pressure at home. He's been in power a lot of years now. and he's feeling the political pressure to replace him. Obviously, COVID has had a massive effect on the Russian economy, like it has with everyone else. They've tried big inroads into the West, and now he's feeling that pressure at home. So the best way to relieve pressure in his own party, in his own country, is to be the strong man. And therefore, by placing troops and almost going onto a war footing, he rallies everyone at home. And we're already seeing his popularity rise back in Russia. So as far as he's concerned, it's job done. He doesn't need to invade. He's actually bolstered his support at home. He's bolstered the morale of the military. He's been shown that he can actually get countries like Belarus, which were former Soviet territories, to actually allow Russian troops to deploy on their territory. That's huge. That's just like having them back in the Warsaw Pact. He retook Crimea, so now the Russians have warm water ports, which they didn't before. And this is a big thing when you're actually trying to fight NATO, which have a lot of warm water ports. When you're Russia and the only naval ports you've got are in the Arctic, it's a real problem. So Crimea has always been a very significant place. That's why they had a Crimea War with the British and the Russians before. So now Crimea is firmly in the hands of Russia, and also some parts of eastern Ukraine, which are largely ethno-Russia, have been taken over by Russian separatists, which are obviously being sponsored by Moscow as well. So the scene is now set for Russia to be able to bolster those separatist elements in the Ukraine, to allow Russia to be seen as a strong point at home. They're still the second largest military in the world. So Putin is doing everything right. The only thing he would do wrong is by launching a full-on invasion into Ukraine. That's never the plan, was never the plan, and will never be the plan. What they may do is a small incursion this is why I thought it was interesting that Biden said that it depends on how small the incursion is. What would probably happen is that there would be an attack on ethno-Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine, which then Russia would feel morally obliged to go in and secure their people from a potential genocide. That's how they would term it. So it would be very minor. They would push troops in purely to secure the Russian populace, and they'll get support with that because the populace in eastern Ukraine is largely Russian and would welcome them. What this would do long term is that it would actually allow Russia to put troops further to the west, increasing the buffer zone, whilst at the same time securing ethno-Russians in Ukraine, and basically it's encroachment. Yeah, that's what it would be. NATO are not going to go to war with encroachment on a sovereign country. It's not even a NATO country. So all this bullshit about NATO getting ready on a war footing, they've always done that, and they've always put troops back and forth into various different NATO countries. It's no threat to Russia. Russia probably totally ignores it, especially when you're only putting 8,000 troops in. When they've got 125 there on the border, it makes no sense whatsoever. So that's Putin's playbook, So he gets his problems solved at home. He gets encroachment into Ukraine. It's a populist movement. So let's look at the American side of things then. Biden. Why is Biden interested in Ukraine? For a start, NATO has no pull on Ukraine whatsoever. It's got no commitment there. Ukraine is never going to be a NATO country. That would create real problems for Russia, unless, of course, Ukraine split. And that's something I'll bring up a bit later. So all of a sudden now Biden is interested in Ukraine. He's not interested in the border on the south of us, but he's interested in the Ukrainian border. Why is that? Well, What he knows is that any politician, any standing politician, especially a president, is usually more popular during a wartime scenario than a peacetime scenario. He's also seen the debacle that was Afghanistan, and he knows that he cannot survive another problem where US citizens currently in the Ukraine, of which there are many, something in the region of 30,000, I believe, to lose those or to have problems there after having plenty of plenty of notice about what the Russian intentions were, that politically would be an absolute disaster for Biden. So he has to be shown to do something. So unlike the Obama administration, which gave the Ukrainians blankets and flak jackets, I think it was, at least the Biden administration are giving them lethal weapons. They know that by giving the Ukraine, and let's face it, the Ukrainian army is no slouch. I mean, you've got 200,000 troops there. That's larger than the British army. And have always been on a war footing. Now you give them Javelin anti-tank missiles, and they are going to be more than a match for a couple of armored divisions that are going to be coming their way. So the Ukrainian army will put up a big fight if they are pushed, but they're not going to be pushed. So the other thing, let's have a look at why Biden would be interested perhaps in Ukraine. If you remember before, there was this whole scandal about Biden going to Ukraine, extorting money from the Ukrainian government. We had Hunter Biden, who was doing very, very shady things with Burisma, the Ukrainian power company. And it is a political scandal that has largely been swept under the rug. Putin knows that information is there in the Ukraine. So if he were to be able to get a populist, pro-Russian government in the Ukraine, guess what? He gets access to all that information, which I believe would be very damning. Not particularly a problem when it was just, Biden the candidate, but now that the fact that he's president of the United States, that gives Putin some real leverage. And especially you've got to remember, Putin is an intelligence agent. He's always going to be after leverage. And if he could actually have leverage, which would essentially be blackmailing the president of the United States, that is huge for Putin. So yes, of course he would love a pro-Russian government in Kiev. How to get it, that's the thing. So at the present time, with the separatist movement in the Ukraine, there's no way that they're going to be overthrowing the whole of the Ukrainian government. And by doing so militarily, it would probably, he doesn't need to have leverage over Biden at that point because he's now at war with him. So that probably would not happen. But that's one of the reasons that Putin would love to have a pro-Russian government in the Ukraine, so that he would be able to then expose the corruption of the Biden cartel, to be able to have leverage on the free world. That's essentially what's going on there. So that is why Biden's interested in the Ukraine. So makes him more popular, gets people taking their mind off of all the other problems, COVID, the drop in the poll numbers, the midterms. I mean, all of the problems that he currently has at home, largely going to be forgotten when he's talking about war. But who's talking about war? It's only the Americans. The Russians aren't talking about war. They're just saying, hey, look, we're just putting our troops there. We're just doing military drills. The Ukrainians are going, what war? We don't know there's a war going on. We know they're there, but they've always been there. They've been there since, 1990. It's no big deal. But life is going on in Ukraine. People are still going to work. They're still doing their thing. They are thinking, in their news media, they're believing that the Americans are pushing this. So much so that, they're going, why are you saying this? This is not actually happening. This is not true. The Russians aren't coming. So they know that they're being played as well. But let's look at from a Ukrainian point of view. So if you're the Ukrainian prime minister right now, you've got Russians on your doorstep, you've got the Americans trying to play you, but you've also got a large separatist movement going on in the Ukraine. You know that your country is divided. You know that your whole element of keeping power is largely dependent on these two factions, both the Russian faction and the Ukrainian faction. Now, if you wanted to get rid of your problems, what would you do as a Ukrainian president? You would probably do a deal with the Russians to say, look, we don't want no beef with you. We know that we're split. We know that the Russian ethno-population of the Ukraine like you. They want to be with you. They want to be with the Warsaw Pact. And therefore, why don't we cede Donetsk and the Donbass region to Russia? Russia would then come in, administer the place. They would then bolster it with their own armed forces. They would feel then secure that they're not going to be attacked by NATO, or that Ukraine would actually be a NATO country. It would actually work for the Ukrainians. They would get rid of their terrorist problem. They could get back to living, within the confines of a smaller Ukraine. But a Ukraine that would then be politically sound, that wouldn't have the threat of pro-Russian governments coming in every cycle. So essentially what you would then do is that you would split the Ukraine in the same way as you split Czechoslovakia. So you had Slovakia and they had the Czech Republic. They split. And then the same way as we saw it with Yugoslavia. So if I was the Ukrainian Prime Minister, I'd be looking at doing that, of having Eastern Ukraine as a separate country that would then go along with the Russians. Putin would be happy. Everyone just takes a breath. And then Western Ukraine then becomes a fully democratized, Western-leaning nation that would then be very much akin to wanting to be a part of NATO and be a part of the West and the whole of the Western economy. So at that stage, I think that would work. What we have seen as well is from Germany's point of view. So Germany has largely been compromised because they are now so reliant on Russian gas coming through from Russia through Ukraine. But now, of course, they realize that Ukraine's a problem. So now they created the new pipeline, which goes into the Baltic Sea, which actually bypasses Ukraine. So the Germans don't want to screw that up because they know that higher gas prices at home are not going to be politically sound and could even lose their own new government under a new chancellor. That's the last thing that he wants to do. So he would probably be open to a split Ukraine as well. That would actually help Germany so that they wouldn't be pissing off Russia. But at the same time, they could then extend their own cultural attachments to Ukraine, like they did. As I said, the Ukrainians had their own SS division during the war. They linked in directly with the Nazis and with Western-leaning nations. So everyone's being played at the moment. The only person that seems to be playing the game well is Putin. Biden's not playing the game very well at all. He's going to lose no matter what, because if Russians went in, Biden loses because he's unprepared. He loses all these Americans, and there's another Afghanistan. If Putin gets in, Biden loses because then all of a sudden all this stuff about Burisma and Hunter Biden, who is always going to be a thorn in Biden's side, always. That is all going to come out, and then you've got problems there as well. If nothing happens, then everyone's going to go, well, you cried wolf. You told us we were going to go to war, and now we're not. Now we've got to look back at the problems back at home as to why your whole defense system, we're on TV saying we're going to be going to war with Russia. So Biden's in a no-win situation. There's no way that he comes out of this looking good. The Germans have been shown to be compromised. They don't come out of this looking good. Economically, they're okay. The Ukrainians, I think if they deal with this properly, they will actually end up with a stronger country without the divisions that have plagued it, since 1940. The Russians will come out of this well. They've demonstrated that with a bit of saber rattling, they can force NATO and the Western nations into doing their bidding, and they will then encroach upon new territories and shore up popularity at home. So that is really what I think is going to be happening. we're all being played at the moment. There's so many different agendas going on. What we've got to do is just recognize when that is, why that is, and at that stage, you know, we then start to, you know, to move forward, you know. So that's my take on the Russia-Ukraine thing for today. I hope that's been useful for you. I'm going to be doing some more videos as we go on. So until that time, I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye now.